Okay, welcome back, and today we're going to start a discussion on cells and cell biology. So let's start off with probably the most fundamental principle from cell biology, and that is the principle of cell theory. So this is like it says, a theory. So it's a set of ideas supported by a lot of observation, a lot of experiments, and a lot of evidence. There are three parts to cell theory. The first part is that all living things are made from one or more cells. So that means that all living things have at least one cell. This applies to the simplest bacterium to the most complex metazoa. A metazoa is an animal. So the cell is the fundamental building block of living things, and from there things get more complicated. Here are some organisms which are unicellular. These are some protozoa, and you'll see some of these in lab if you're taking lab. This little fuzzy fellow in the middle here is a paramecium, and if you are observing amoeba in lab, then you'll see some paramecium. So we're talking about organisms which range from the single cellular all the way to the multicellular, and even the multicellular organisms have a range of complexity. Here are some jellyfish, some relatively simple animals, and you obviously are more familiar with more complex animals, but even these jellyfish are composed of multiple cells arranged into tissues. And plants also have cells. Some people seem to come to biology with the misconception that plants don't have cells, but even the seeds of plants are multicellular, having many cells composing multiple tissue types. And so this is an absolutely huge baobab tree, composed ultimately of cells which are as small as 20 to 50 microns in length or width. So the cell is the fundamental unit of life, and so if we look at tissues, we were going to see cells being used to build up living organisms. So what you're looking at here is a cross-section of some colonic epithelia, and you can see lots of different cells and lots of different cell types. And so there's an epithelia layer, which is this layer along the top of the tissue as we're looking at it. Obviously, it may not necessarily be the top in the actual tissue structure in the organism, but that's at the top of our image. And all of these kind of dark spots, these are nuclei. And then there are some goblet cells here which produce mucus, and that lubricates the movement of material through your colon. So fecal material, after water's been absorbed, obviously needs to be assisted in its passage through the lower colon particularly. And so those are goblet cells. And then we've got some connective tissue cells down here. This is going to be loose connective tissue. And in other tissue types, you're going to see fibroblasts and macrophages and adipocytes. But when we look at a tissue, the basic building block is the cell. And so here are our kind of first two tenets of cell biology, really, is that every living thing is composed of at least one cell. The cell is the fundamental unit of life. And the third tenet of cell theory is best expressed in Latin, cellulae e cellulae, which means that all cells come from cells. So to get existing cells, to get new cells in tissues, all we do is we divide the existing cells. And so those populations of cells are called stem cells. We're not going to talk about those here, but one cell divides to become two to become four. And so we produce new cells we produce new cells based on the division of existing cells, and we'll look at cell division a lot later. And so when we take our fundamental building block, which is the cell, we arrange cells into tissues. And tissues are collections of cells which are performing a common function, like that colonic epithelia we saw. And then we assemble tissues into organs, and so organs are simply collections of tissues performing again a common function. And so an organ would be something like your heart, your brain, your colon, something like that. Colon maybe not so much as a bad example, ignore that. And then we get organ systems like your reproductive tract. That's a collection of systems. Your digestive tract, that's your stomach, which is an organ. We've got small intestines, large intestines. So those are collections of organs. Those are called organ systems. And then we get all the way up to organisms. And so obviously we're talking about complex organisms here, animals and that kind of thing. Plants, this applies to plants as well. And then when we get down, even some of the simpler animals are organized into cells, tissues and organs. And then when we get down to the prokaryotes, we're looking at cells. And then there are some people who would like to argue that prokaryotes can actually arrange into tissues, and that's a discussion more of microbiology and the formation of biofilms and things like that. So we've got cell theory, which comes in 3 parts. Cell is the fundamental unit of life. All organisms are made from at least one cell, and then new cells come from existing cells. So that wraps up for this first part. Don't forget 3 tenets to cell theory, and then how those cells are arranged into more complex structures. And we'll pick it up next time.